Don said if he was sober that night, Deedee would still be alive today. Deedee was a stunning woman and such a good person as well. When she was a teenager, Deedee attended Fairfax High School, where she met fellow student Toriano Jackson. He was the brother of Michael Jackson and a member of the world-famous Jackson 5 band. But that's not why she liked Tito. For her, it was all about his personality. Even though he was famous, he was actually very quiet and shy around his peers. Deedee, on the other hand, was a little more bubbly and fun, and they actually balanced each other out that way. Eventually they got engaged and they got married shortly after graduating high school on June 16th, 1972, and their wedding actually made national news, which was a lot of attention for Deedee that she had never experienced before. The media started speculating that maybe Deedee would be the one to break up the Jackson 5, that she would distract Tito so much from his brothers that would be the end of them. So a lot of people out there were angry about Deedee. A lot of people were jealous of her, but none of that really bothered her. She did not seem to be affected by fame much. She didn't see them as celebrities. She saw them as regular people. Her family, who she loved. They had 3 sons, Toriano Jr., Terrell, and Tito Joe, and Deedee loved being a mom. She was such a genuine, hands-on, caring mother. She stayed home when Tito went on tour, sometimes for months at a time, and she was basically a single parent. Unfortunately, Deedee and Tito ended up getting divorced in 1988. The Jackson talent definitely seemed to rub off on the boys. All 3 of them started playing music at a really young age. They started the group 3T, and entered the world of fame that their mother had kind of shielded them from. And they actually named their group this because it was Deedee's nickname for her sons. She called them the 3 T's. Throughout their childhood, Deedee was involved in multiple charities and causes and was a great role model for her sons, you know, teaching them the importance of giving back to their communities and being a good person. When the guys were in their late teens, early 20s, they were on the brink of releasing their new debut album. They were super excited about it, and at this time Deedee was dating, and she ended up meeting this guy named Don Bohanna. He was a wealthy businessman, and he also was a wealthy divorcee. And Don was actually 20 years older than Deedee, but that really never mattered to her. She really was about seeing the person within. He also was a family man. He had 2 daughters of his own. Don was also friends with politicians and celebrities like Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, Sammy Davis Jr. So Don was really a catch. He was a really interesting person, and Deedee was into him. When the 2 of them met in the spring of 1994, Deedee was making a lot of effort to get to know Don's kids. She really wanted to get to know Donna especially. Don, on the other hand, wasn't really making much effort to connect with her kids. That summer when they first met, Donna was actually planning a wedding, and Deedee loved, you know, anything about traditions, weddings, anything like that. And she jumped at the chance to help her plan. While they were working on her wedding, the 2 of them became really friends. And of course, Don really liked that. So the 2 of them continued to see each other, and they would spend a lot of evenings out by Don's pool, having a few drinks. And that kind of became their routine. And for a while, it seemed like things were going really well. Then August came along, August of 1994, and Deedee came over for one of their normal nights with Don. Around midnight, Deedee talked to Donna on the phone. Donna is Don's daughter. Just trying to clarify. I know there's a lot of D's here. Donna said that Deedee seemed like she was in a great mood. Didn't seem like anything was out of the ordinary. But at some point, things went wrong. And Don ended up calling 911 at 3:30 in the morning, saying that someone was drowning in his pool. When the paramedics arrived, Deedee was on the side of the pool and she was naked. And Don was also naked, and they were both very intoxicated. 39-year-old Deedee Jackson was rushed to the hospital. Her boys got a call, and unfortunately, by the time they got there, she was already pronounced dead. Deedee's family members were totally shocked and devastated. And for many of them, it just didn't feel right that this was a horrific accident. They felt like there was more to the story. The investigation was led by Detective Bob Snapper. He found clear evidence just from the scene that the couple had been drinking pretty heavily. So the detectives interviewed Don just hours after he had placed that initial 911 call, and he was clearly still drunk. He failed the sobriety test. He wasn't making a lot of sense. Could something have happened because of the drinking? He said that Deedee was in the jacuzzi area, and he was on the other side of the pool with his legs hanging into the water. She started swimming towards him and did an Olympic-style flip and started swimming back towards the jacuzzi near a pool light. Then she just stayed in that area, treading water in the 15-foot deep area of the pool. And suddenly he realizes that she has just stopped and she's lying face down in the water. He jumped in and swam over to her. He was trying to lift her out, but for some reason, she refused. Eventually, he managed to get her close enough to the edge that he was able to flip her out of the pool. And after that, she was just laying there on the concrete, motionless. Now, the detective who was interviewing Dawn said that when he was explaining what happened that night, he seemed to have no emotion at all. And he also seemed to provide almost too many details, but he said at the time he didn't really make too much of a note of it. And when the funeral service came up, it was going to be big, and there were going to be a lot of famous people there. The media was just desperate for more details, and when they didn't have the right details, they'd start just filling things in with nonsense. And at this point, as the police were conducting their investigation, they really didn't have a lot of evidence pointing towards Dawn doing anything wrong. But from the beginning, her family was very suspicious. They started to wonder why Deedee was even in the pool, because according to her family, Deedee was absolutely terrified of water and did not know how to swim. When Tito, her ex-husband, heard that she had drowned, his first words were actually, "What was she doing in the water?" He said that neither of them ever swam, and that as far as he knew, she hadn't learned how to swim recently. But Dawn said that when Deedee met him, he decided that he was going to teach her to swim, and he had been teaching her, weeks leading up to her death. Donna, his daughter, was also aware that he was teaching her to swim. And Dawn, from the beginning, was insistent that the night that Deedee drowned, she knew how to swim. So there became a lot of tension between the two families. Deedee's family was pushing the police to look a little bit deeper. They thought maybe there could have been foul play involved, but Dawn's family was saying the complete opposite, that there was absolutely no way, especially Donna. And in that last phone call that Donna had with Deedee, the last thing that Deedee had said to her actually was, "See you on Sunday," which was Donna's wedding. And instead of postponing her wedding, Donna decided to shorten the guest list by a lot, have a more intimate wedding, and skip the honeymoon because everyone was just so upset about what had happened to Deedee. What's weird about this is it turns out that the wedding ended up being on the same day of Deedee's funeral. So Donna and Dawn didn't attend. This was definitely seen as pretty weird. Did not help with the people who were suspicious of Dawn. Deedee's autopsy was performed by Dr. David Posey, and he found that Deedee's blood alcohol level was shockingly high. It was 3 times the legal limit for driving, and he also noted bruises and scratches and cuts around her body and her face that he noted as blunt force trauma. All of these were listed as non-accidental, and the report also listed her death as an assisted drowning, obviously indicating that there's likely foul play involved. But her official cause of death was listed as undetermined. But Dawn had an explanation for the cuts and bruises. He said that there was a struggle to get her out of the pool, that he really had to pull her out and drop her onto the concrete, which could have caused the bruising and the scraping. But Deedee's family was not convinced. The whole thing had been so devastating for Deedee's sons that they felt like they really couldn't move on in their lives until they figured out what really happened. So when the district attorney made no moves to file charges against Dawn, the family decided to file a wrongful death suit against him. The lawsuit was filed by attorney Brian Oxman. Brian argued that Dawn was in financial trouble and that he jumped at a chance to be dating someone who had a connection to the wealthy Jackson family, someone who possibly had deep pockets. He proposed the idea that Don had decided to ask her for money and that she refused, and he became angry and he killed her. And he said that Don had a rage problem, that he would often take out his aggression on women, that he had a history of violence against women, and that 911 had come to their house at least a dozen times. But according to Detective Snapper, this wasn't true. He said that the police had responded to a few calls at Don's residence, but they were all for noise complaints for parties. Also, there was no evidence that any former girlfriends or anyone at all had ever called to report Don for domestic violence. And not only that, detectives also found that Don was not in any financial trouble, and there was no evidence of him asking Deedee for money. But regardless of the proof, Brian launched a full media campaign against Don. And then, at some point, it came out that Don had actually been connected to other drowning victims. Turns out he was hosting a party on his boat in Marina del Rey, and the boat capsized. And 2 of the women who were on board couldn't swim, and they both drowned. However, their deaths were ruled accidental, but of course the fact that he was involved with other drowning deaths does not look good for him when it comes to Deedee. Eventually, the wrongful death suit that the family had filed had been dismissed, and Don tried to stay out of all of it as much as he could, tried to avoid the spotlight. Meanwhile, his daughter Donna took every opportunity she could to defend her father to the public. Don had decided to launch his own investigation, and he wanted to prove once and for all that it was an accidental drowning. And around this time, he introduced the idea that he believed that Deedee's death could have been caused because she was drinking along with taking medication. Over the next few years, multiple prosecutors reviewed Deedee's case and declined to press charges on Don. But then in 1996, a new prosecutor named Lori Ann Jones took on the case. Deedee's death was changed from undetermined to homicide-assisted drowning. Don was charged with second-degree murder of Deedee Jackson. Don pled not guilty, and he happened to have a friend who is a very famous attorney. His name is Johnny Cochran. So he connected Don with his friend, a renowned forensic expert, Dr. Michael Bodden. He was very successful. He'd actually been chosen by Congress to investigate the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And after he reviewed everything about Deedee's case, he determined that there was nothing homicidal about it, that it was simply 2 adults who had a lot and experienced an accidental drowning. And he also noted that the bruises that were found all over Deedee's body could have been caused because she had a liver disease, which can cause extra bruising. Also, Don took a polygraph test in October of 1996, and he received a score of 99.99 NDI. No deception indicated. That is a super strong score. So the official trial for the murder of Deedee Jackson started in June of 1988. The prosecution focused mostly on Deedee's fear of water, and they brought several friends and family up to testify about that. They also focused on her injuries, all the bruises and cuts, and how Don didn't have anything like that on him. And in a very surprising move, Harold Braun, his defense attorney, decided not to call any expert witnesses to the stand. Not even Dr. Michael Baden, who even said that he was very ready to testify and was super surprised that they never brought him up. And then he ended up putting Don on the stand instead. And this did not go well. Don said that he actually didn't get any preparation from his attorney, and he was totally ripped apart on the stand. And Don was convicted of second-degree murder. And when the verdict was read, the Jackson family was clearly very relieved, very happy. They audibly cheered. Don, to this day, has continued to say that he is innocent, that he had nothing to do with Deedee's death. He was extremely angry at Harold Braun. In 2017, 2020 released a special on Deedee, and it caught a lot of attention. The information in this episode ends up bringing up a lot of good points that make you think twice about Don's conviction. And Don himself has continued to say that Harold Braun screwed him all the way when it came to this trial. Don actually thinks that Harold screwed him on purpose because he had a couple of late payments. But Harold denies this. But what's crazy is after Don's trial, the Jackson family ended up hiring the attorney Harold Braun to represent them. Donna ended up hiring a private investigator to look into things further, and he found a lot of questionable things. He's quite concerned about the conduct of Dr. David Posey. They found out that because Dr. Posey was no longer working for the coroner's office, he was just a paid witness in the trial, which makes them question his authenticity regarding the case. Donna also found out that during the time of her father's trial, Dr. Posey had filed for bankruptcy and was about to lose his home. But in very suspicious timing, Dr. Posey's bankruptcy was discharged and his home was saved the day before the trial started. But it turns out not all of the shady, controversial figures in this case were working against Don. Remember the polygraph tester who said that Don had received NDI? He actually was accused of falsifying his credentials. So everything about this trial, this case, seemed to be a mess. Don is still in jail to this day. He's in his 80s. He has said that he believes if he was sober that night, that Deedee would still be alive today. Deedee's family has done something really cool to maintain her memory and her legacy. They've started the Deedee Jackson Foundation. It's a nonprofit that helps children deal with grief, loss, and trauma through music therapy. That is going to be it for me today. This is not as much of a cut and dry case as normal. A lot of the rumors about Don and his domestic violence were proven to be untrue, so there really isn't a lot of evidence or a lot of motive for why Don would have wanted to commit this murder. And, you know, you're supposed to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone is guilty to lock them away for the rest of their lives. I mean, he'll likely die in there. I feel really bad for Deedee's sons. I mean, they really missed out on a life with a wonderful mother who cared about them so much. I wish that they could just get the truth, you know, whatever that is. Stay safe out there, guys.